Today we're going to make a low-carb Danish, so that's why you're joining me in the kitchen with my pajamas on. Low-carb Danish is a treat at our house, so this isn't something we have all the time, but it is pretty low-carb, and it's from a wonderful food blogger, Elizabeth at Up Late Anyway. If you haven't discovered her blog, she's fantastic. But this is her recipe, and I'm going to do, it has several stages, and I'm a little nervous actually about doing this while taping because I haven't made it that often, but when I've made it, it's a favorite. In fact, it's such a favorite that I will be tripling the recipe. So if I get you confused about quantities, please don't be. Just refer back to her recipe, which I'll link in the description. But it is so good. And I'm going to do something a little different with it too. I'll give you some different options or varieties, and I do try to simplify it as well. So what you start with is you start by making the cream cheese filling. I've already made that because the other part is where I wanted to spend my time in the video, and I try to keep these short. But basically what you put into the filling is 6 ounces of cream cheese. Now remember, I've tripled this recipe, but you start with 6 ounces of cream cheese, 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, a ½ teaspoon of vanilla extract. Don't forget the oopsie that I always put in because vanilla extract makes it always so much better. A 1/4 cup of sugar equivalent, and use whatever you prefer, whatever sweetener is your favorite, and then 1 egg yolk, just the yolk, so you're going to separate it. So I tripled those ingredients and used my little hand mixer and got that all blended up. And so ideally that would be sitting in the fridge or just sitting there waiting for us. Now I'm going to make the dough part. Now for the dough, it's pretty simple. The original recipe, and I am looking at that on my iPad, the original recipe calls for 6 tablespoons of almond flour. Again, I have tripled this. It calls for 3 tablespoons of coconut flour. I'm just going to throw that in there. Again, I'm tripling. And then it calls for 4 tablespoons of sugar equivalent. So again, if mine looks different from yours, you know why. I'm going to also add to this a ½ teaspoon of baking powder. Now remember, I'm tripling, so if you see me do more than a ½ teaspoon, don't give me an ugly comment about I put too much baking powder. And I would at least, this is such a great recipe, you might not want to triple it, but doubling it, I would definitely recommend. Tripling it worked well for my purposes because of the amount of ingredients that she used. So I have in here the almond flour, the coconut flour, the sugar equivalent, baking powder, and you use a ½ teaspoon of vanilla. And then it talks about butter, and let's talk about that. Let me put in the vanilla, and again, I'm tripling it. So I'm going to use a little more than a teaspoon. What you also use to make this dough, and this is similar to the Fathead pizza. If you haven't made that, you'll definitely want to try it. But it's similar to the Fathead pizza in that you use mozzarella cheese. So the mozzarella cheese is in the microwave. Let me grab it. I've been melting the cheese. Now Elizabeth says make sure you use the skim milk mozzarella because too much fat, the dough doesn't come out as well. I read that note in her recipe after I had been to the grocery store. So I have full fat mozzarella. She suggests using mozzarella with 5 grams or less of fat per 28 gram serving. I have more than that in mine. So I'm going to hold off on the butter until I see what the texture looks like, and you'll see this in her notes. Now the only way to do this nicely is just to get my hands in there. So I'm going to take the whisk out, and I'm just going to get my hands into this dough. And if you mess with dough at all, you'll know that usually just getting your hands in it is the best way to go. Now this is the part, don't let this scare you. This is the part that can get fussy. If it doesn't mix well, you just heat it up. And so you want to do this in a microwave safe bowl, and you simply keep going back and forth to the microwave. And so you just mix it by hand, and like I said, it's not dissimilar from the Fathead pizza recipe. I'm making an awful mess. And I'll warm it in just a bit to incorporate it some more. And then after you warm the dough, or after you get it well mixed, you add an egg at the end. Now I'll be adding 3 eggs because again, I'm tripling. My family really does like this. Last time we made it, my mom came in town. My husband and I were going out of town for a conference, and I made it thinking we could take some with us to the hotel, and I think we shared one piece of this. So now you understand why I'm tripling it. Okay, if you look at this, the mozzarella is cooled by my adding the ingredients, and see how it's kind of stringy? So that's not going to work so well for me. Let me put it in the microwave, and let's talk a little bit about the butter and whether I should add that. Okay, so I heated it back up, and in terms of heating it, I just want to make it mix better. I want to melt the mozzarella. The other thing that I did was I added the butter. Now she does call for butter in the recipe, and she says, you know, be careful with that if you have a really high-fat cheese. I added the butter because it was so dry, and you can see kind of what this dough looks like. And with the butter, it's mixing up much, much better. Now remember, I'm going to add egg to this as well. So, and you don't want to add the egg when it's too hot because you don't want cooked egg. It doesn't look appetizing at all to me, or probably to you, but trust me when I tell you, this is fantastic. So hopefully the time I'm having with this will make you feel better about it when you're doing it on your own at home. So I've mixed this up. I did add butter. I didn't add quite as much butter as she would have called for, and you can see how it's kind of forming a dough for me like that, even without the egg. Okay, and I don't think it needs more butter. I can add more melted butter if I choose to, but I think when I get the egg in that it will be the right consistency. If not, we'll add more egg then. It's really pretty forgiving. I'm sorry, we'll add more butter then. Actually, it is a little dry, so I'm going to go ahead and add some more butter. And you start with the 4 tablespoons, well, depending on what you're doing. Let me tell you too very quickly that the brand of coconut flour you use and how carefully you scoop the coconut flour can also give you different results. So while that's warm, and this is really warm, I'll go ahead and just put that butter in and it'll melt pretty easily. Okay, so I've got the melted butter. It's starting, it really is coming together. I can warm it some more, but I think I'm going to put the egg in and mush that in. You know, that technical term that we use when we're making dough is we mush. We did that when we made the flatbread. All right, so let's get the eggs in there. Again, I'm tripling. The recipe itself calls for 1 egg. And I'm tripling, so we'll do 3. And there's probably a technique to this I could do better, but I'm not that good. So once I get the dough together, Elizabeth's recipe calls for rolling it out, using a rolling pin and actually rolling it out. You can do that, and I did probably the first time, but I'm definitely a novice, as you can see. I am not that good with dough and rolling things out. So what I'm going to do is actually pat it out, and I found that if I do it by hand, I can get the right thickness. And this does look like a complete mess, and I probably could use a food processor or hand mixer at this point, but honestly, getting in there with my hands is not a problem, and I'm getting it probably mixed as well as I would, and I get a sense of what the dough is doing and how it's changing. And you just want to keep mixing this. Again, I can warm it if I need to if the cheese gets too cold. That's not the case right now, but you want to mix it until it's the same color. So I'm going to pat it out to make the pastry. Another thought that I had that I have not tried is I have a muffin top pan, and I think a muffin top pan could be perfect for this. Okay, so this is finally looking more like a dough and coming together, so maybe I look like I know what I'm doing, except I should have taken my rings off before I started this. Okay, so here's the dough. You could try it at this point to make sure it's sweet enough. I think it's going to be just perfect because I followed the recipe, and her recipe is amazing. So I'm going to take a ball of dough about like this, and she makes them larger than I do. Because of the carbs, we try to make sure we're careful with portion size. And again, you can roll this out with a rolling pin. It will be nice and flat and pretty. I'm actually just going to shape it in kind of a round, and that is actually bigger than I intended. as I shape it, I'm going to come up on the edges a little bit. Let's make sure you can see. I'm going to come up on the edges a little bit because then I'm going to add some filling to it. So I'm just making a little bit of a well, not much of one, and this won't hold together extremely well, but I'm going around the edges and just kind of pulling them in. And you want it actually a little flatter than probably what I have. And I have this on parchment paper. Parchment paper is just wonderful. It keeps things from sticking and just gives it, in my opinion, gives it a little bit of a nice brown. I think it helps things to brown. So anyway, I'm going to do those. Again, she suggests rolling it out. You can certainly do that. I actually am going to try my idea with the muffin top pan. So if you have a muffin top pan, I don't know how I cooked before I got in my bed. If you have a muffin top pan, you certainly can use that too. So let me pause the video for just a minute and I'll get these rolled out and then I'll show you what's next. Okay, so we're back. I've gotten the dough I worked with, and what I decided to do, I started trying to make these into individual danishes, and I was patting it out, and I thought, you know what, this is for the birds. It's taken forever. And so I did go back and use the muffin top pan. I think this is going to work really, really well. I may have gotten it too thick in some places, we'll see, but it gives it a little edge, and so yeah, we'll see how that comes out. And then I got really lazy, and I decided that I would just make this larger Danish, and I would use, this is a 9 or 10 by 6, it's like a 10 by 6 pan. This is my grandmother's. I love this. It's an old Fire King glass dish, and you know, you have to go to the antique stores to find these anymore, so I love using it. But anyway, I've spread that out, so what we do now is put the cream cheese filling in. Now with Elizabeth's recipe, which is fantastic, you simply put a cream cheese filling in it, you bake it at 400 degrees for 10 minutes, and then you cover it with an icing. You make a really nice, just a sweet glaze almost. One of the things that I did when I made this last time was I made a fruit filling. And it doesn't take a lot, but just a nice little fruit filling to give it some flavor. And I'm going to do a little bit of that, so I can show you that at the end in case you're interested in how to make it. Lower carb fruits include strawberries, blueberries, and blackberries. And blackberries are one of my favorites, not so much for my husband. So I'll be doing blueberries because that's his favorite. That's actually what he asked for. You can do other fruits, just make sure you keep it very low on the fruit side. But I'll show you how to do that. There's several easy ways to do it, and a lot of it depends on what you eat and where you are in the process. Now adding fruit certainly adds some carbs. So if you're in the maintenance phase, or if you can tolerate higher carbs, then you're probably okay with that. If you're still just getting started, you might want to just avoid the fruit altogether. I like easy and simple, but I also try to pay attention to the sweeteners that my family uses, and so I will use fruit, usually frozen or fresh fruit, and some extracts, and some gelatin, grass-fed gelatin, plain gelatin, not the sugar-free flavored Jell-O, because we don't like the chemicals that are in that. But I'll use that, but you can also use a dollop of sugar-free jam or jelly, and that works too. So let me put this in the oven while I make the others, and then we'll come back, take a look at that, and we'll make some of the fruit toppings. Okay, so let's finish these guys up. These are the ones that I made in the muffin top tin, and they really are just perfect. They look like little cheesecakes, but they're perfect for little pastries or little cheese danishes. It makes the dough thicker than you'd like. It rises a little bit, so it makes it thicker than if you rolled it out. But I think that's okay. Next time I probably would just make more of them. Let's make the icing and get these guys finished. So what I have in here is powdered sweetener, and one easy way to do this is to take whatever granulated sweetener you use, whether it's Swerve or xylitol, put it in a Ninja or a blender and just blend it, and that gives you that powdered consistency. So the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons. Remember, I've tripled, but would pretend that's 3 tablespoons. I'm going to do this again a really easy way, just putting it in my Ninja and then pouring it over. It also calls for 2 ounces of cream cheese. Again, I've doubled it. I'm going to put that in there. And it calls for 2 ounces of heavy cream. Again, I've tripled this recipe. So I've got my sweetener, my cream cheese, and then it calls for vanilla. So I'm going to put, it calls for a half teaspoon of vanilla. I'm going to put, again, tripling the recipe, so a little more than that. And you want it to be thin enough that this is like a glaze or icing consistency. So if you need to adjust, depending on your sweetener, even though it's powdered sweetener, sweeteners do different things when you process them. So kind of use your own judgment whether you need more cream, some butter, you know, whatever the case might be. So let me blend this real quick. Okay, so I blended that, and I just did it, like I said, for ease, and my Ninja will take a peek at it and see what the consistency is like. That's pretty thick. I'll use this. That's pretty thick. I might thin that down. Actually, I think I will thin that down with a little more cream. Again, different sweeteners behave in different ways. So I'll thin it with a cream, and then that's it. Oh, wow, it tastes fantastic. Add a little more. And you can do different flavors with this. You could do a mocha flavor. I think in coffee in there. You could put a little almond extract, depending on what flavors you wanted to do with your pastry. Let me blend that really quick. I just want it a little bit thinner. Okay, and I don't know how I ever learned to cook without my Ninja. So that is done with that. And I'm going to take this and just, if you ever come to my house, you'll know exactly where everything is. I'm going to put just a little bit of this in a Ziploc baggie, and I've got a baggie that's probably pretty big for what I'm doing. But anyway, I'll put the icing in there, and I'm not a pro by any stretch of the imagination, as you can tell from my doing this. But I'm going to put it there in the corner. I'm going to take my scissors and clip this off, and then just pipe some icing across it like that. You don't want a lot, but just a little sweetness. Now, something else you can do is make and I'm just gonna swirl it all the way across. Like I said, I'm not very good at this. I'll tell my daughter I made a G for her. I made a blueberry sauce, and this is like a blueberry with gelatin, and we really like this on the Danishes. This is not in the original recipe. It does add carbs, so go with where you are in your journey. But you can take just a tablespoon or so of this. It will thicken as it sits, or you can bake it into it, whichever you prefer. And then you can put icing across it that way as well. I'm not going to do all of them. I messed up the top on that one, so I definitely want to do that one. But I can then take the icing and just go straight across. And the same thing with that guy. And like I said, I need to practice this. I'm not very good. Yours will probably be much, much prettier than mine. You can post a picture in the comments. Whoops. If yours are prettier. This has been my blooper video. As I said, I'm not very good at this. And I'm getting to the end of it. The first one was probably the prettiest. But as they cool, simply put a little icing on them, and you can put a smiley face, whatever you think that your family would enjoy. And of course, that's not quite as bad. I hope that you enjoy these Danishes. Do whatever flavor you like. Oh, and I wanted to mention too, you can do sugar-free preserves if you use Splenda, and that's something that's easy to put in the center. I'm using blueberry because that's what my husband requested, and he really enjoys these Danishes. So anyway, hope that you enjoy them with your family.